hit the record button. We will be recording this and I will get that over to you as well. So I do have the slide deck available for everyone. So I'll discuss with you how to access that once we're finished with today's discussion. So again, everyone has the ability to unmute and engage. I encourage that. We're a very talkative and engaging group. So feel free to share. If not, you can always use the chat feature privately to me or Dr. Lisa. We'll keep an eye on that. And I'll let you go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Jeanette. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today, we're going to talk about self-awareness. And it's an interesting concept, self-awareness. What is it? And if all of you will just, in a few words or sentences, type in your own definition of self-awareness. And we're going to define it and talk about it as this presentation goes on. And Jeanette, later I'll ask you to read some of those. But it starts as a theory. And so before 1 year old, if you put a red dot on the end of a toddler's nose and put them in front of a mirror and ask them to touch the red dot, they'll typically lean forward and touch the dot in the mirror, on the mirror of the child in the mirror, without the awareness that the dot is on themselves. And most kids will do that by 1 year old. By about 21 months old, 70% of kids will actually touch their own nose and recognize that the dot is on themselves. And it's the awareness at that time, we call it object permanence of, wow, I'm that thing in the mirror, like that is me. And it's the origin of the self. And self-awareness theory started with a very dichotomous thinking of our self, whereas we're either self-focused, our subjective self, or objective, we're thinking of ourself and comparing ourselves to others. And we find that self-awareness really is more of an ongoing loop between the two that includes self-reflection and then introspection and our comparing ourselves outwardly in the world. So self-reflection is really looking at ourselves and our fundamental purpose and our willingness to exercise introspection. And introspection is the examination of our own conscious thoughts and feelings. And it takes place in respect to our mental state and in respect to a deeper, more spiritual, meaningful context. Introspection is really different than rumination. Some people think like, well, I think about a lot. Like I'm thinking about all the time, like, what are they thinking? What's going on? What am I going to do next? That's really different than self-reflection. And it can become problematic when it's rumination, which is really related to thinking on more negative self-perceptions and emotions. And reflection would be more openness to experience. Reflection is a more solution-focused type of thinking versus rumination that is more worry-based. And as we kind of compare ourselves to others, this is the part of considering who we are in relation to the world around us. If we notice a difference between who we are and the world around us, we may decide we want to change. And then we contemplate change, right? Like, will it take a lot of work? Do we know how to change? Is it worth it to change? What are the benefits of changing? What are the costs associated with changing? And in some ways, the aspects where we don't conform to the norm may be unchangeable. For example, something like height. And that may lead to more introspection. It could lead to rumination, where one's constantly worried about one's height, or introspection and self-examination, where one recognizes that you may be below or above the normal height, and look at the advantages and the disadvantages associated with both without a judgment upon yourself. In these four categories, I want you to quickly think of, are you an introspector, a seeker, a pleaser, or aware? And it's a Johari type window where we have a low level of, we have internal self-awareness versus external self-awareness. And they just break it down into high and low. So on low level of external self-awareness, that's one who's not very aware of how others perceive them, but high level of internal self-awareness. They're very, very aware of what's going on for them. Those are the introspectors. They're clear on who they are, but they don't really challenge their own views or search for their blind spots. They don't get feedback from the world around them. And this can harm relationships because it's our blind spot. We really don't understand the impact that we're having on others. So I might know that this steak is not cooked to the temperature I prefer, but I don't have the awareness that the way I'm speaking to the waiter and discussing how I prefer my steak is inappropriate, right? We all know that person. They have high level of internal self-awareness, but low level of external self-awareness. Then we have the low level of internal self-awareness and low level of external self-awareness. They're not very aware of how they feel. They're always wondering. And yet they don't really know how their others see them. So it's the person who doesn't know where they fit. They have a hard time defining what they stand for. They're easily swayed by others, and they feel stuck often and frustrated in their relationships and with their performance because they don't really know how to make change. We have low level of internal self-awareness and high level of external self-awareness. This is the pleaser. Again, they really can't figure out what they're about, what they want, but they really want to focus on pleasing others. So they can tell how the world around them is responding. They just can't tell quite what they stand for. And so over time, they tend to continue to compromise themselves and end up in relationships or in the world of work where they don't feel success or fulfillment. And then we have the people who are aware. And that's a high level of external self-awareness and a high level of internal self-awareness. And these people know who they are, what they want. They seek it out. They value others' opinions. They take it into consideration. They tend to be leaders, and they benefit and value self-awareness. Now, the funny thing about self-awareness, most people actually think they have self-awareness. And it's a tricky concept to measure, but the person who did, Dr. Tasha Eurich, in a study she did, she found about 10 to 15% of respondents met her criteria for aware. That is high level of internal self-awareness and high level of external self-awareness. Now, again, measuring these things is really hard, but it's important to understand we typically think that we're aware and we're not aware. And even when we know about biases, we don't understand the impact they have on us. And I love this little study. You put out pantyhose, a 4-pack of pantyhose, and you mark them A through D. And they screened people coming out of a grocery store and asked women which set of pantyhose did they prefer the most, A through D, where A is on the left and D is on the right, and right in order. And they asked a lot of women, and more consistently than average, women picked D. Now, these were all pantyhose out of this same exact pack. After women picked which pantyhose they preferred, they asked them why. And most women gave something like they're better quality, they look nicer, they came up with some answer, even though these were all pantyhose, again, out of the very same pack. So then what the researchers did was, and you don't know about this, but the researchers knew about this, which is the bias of the right. And people tend to pick the right about 70% of the time. So they found that a significant amount, more than average, 70% of the time, women pick D, same exact pantyhose. Why are they picking D? Because of the bias on the right. So the researchers took it to the next level and explained to the participants who were picking D because of bias on the right, because remember, they're all the same pantyhose. They explained, did you understand that? Do you know that there's a bias to the right and that people tend to pick things on the right and say they prefer them? Typically, almost universally, the people who picked D still said they didn't believe that was why they were influenced, that they could understand that there would be a bias to the right, but they maintained their conviction that they chose the pantyhose because it was either superior quality, it was, they made up some made up reason for it. So it goes to show us that even when we become aware of our own biases, we still don't recognize that we're being affected by them. So the same's true with self-awareness. We all think we have self-awareness, and it's hard to know when you don't have self-awareness. So, Jeanette, would you share what anybody said for how they define self-awareness? Do we have any answers?
I don't see anything in the chat yet, but I'm going to share while my mic is open that I would define self-awareness as it applies to me as how my actions or behaviors affect or impact others.
Okay.
But that's just me.
Right. Which is part of it. So I have this whole list here of what self-awareness looks like. And in that respect, self-awareness is your impact on others, right? And I talked about it being that loop. Also critical to self-awareness is understanding your own values, strengths, and limitations. Understanding your own triggers and reactions. Looking for patterns in the way you perceive what happens to you. This is the part you mentioned, understanding how others perceive you, which would be the impact that your behaviors, thoughts, and actions have on the world around you. The ability to look outside your perspective, to look at facts, and to be open to new ideas. Paying attention to and understanding the way you think, feel, and behave. So what am I thinking? What am I doing? How am I feeling? These are questions that we can ask ourselves for self-awareness. And those are all sort of layered concepts, and I'll talk a little bit more about them, but why even be self-aware? They show it improves our mood, and when we're self-aware, we have a better ability to regulate our emotions. And when we have a better ability to regulate our emotions, our feelings, and our mood, because we understand the connection between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, so we know where to intervene, we can change a behavior and change a mood, change a thought and change a mood. And when you can change your emotions by your thoughts and your behaviors, you're better at decision making, because we know that the wise mind, the thoughtful mind, makes much better decisions than the emotional mind that tends to be short-term and impacted by our impulses. Our wise mind looks towards our long-term values and our goals. When you can regulate your emotions, you're a better communicator. You have the ability to be honest about your thoughts while respecting others' wishes and opinions. When you're self-aware, you can be more productive because you can recognize your need for a break. You can recognize your distractions. When you're more self-aware, you can open yourself up to more future opportunities. You see greater possibilities, knowing both your strengths and your weaknesses. Remember, I mentioned the person who might be below average height. They probably don't want to go on to be a professional basketball player, but they might want to go on to a profession where height is not an attribute and excel greatly.
Dr. Lisa, I have a question. I kind of have a mantra that I say to myself, and I want to get your thoughts on this before I continue using this mantra. I sort of say to myself, if I choose a thought, then I'm choosing a corresponding behavior or action. How do you feel about that? What are your thoughts on that? If you choose a thought, if I choose to feel and think positively, then most of my actions and behaviors from that moment on are going to be positive. And I'm so far it's been pretty effective. So I kind of look at it as I try to set myself up for success in that area every day. So I do say that to myself, or I write it on my mirror, or put it on a sticky pad on my computer. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
On choosing your thoughts. Your thoughts leads to I would say that your thoughts lead to your behaviors, and your behaviors lead to your thoughts. And so choosing them all ultimately leads to emotional regulation. Right? At the end, you choose your thoughts and you choose your behaviors, and your mood tends to follow the two of those. But your thoughts and your behaviors have equal influence on one another.
That's helpful. Thank you. It makes sense. It makes sense. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Here's some traits of people who we find are self-aware. They tend to be wise. And there's a quote at the end I'm going to share, but wisdom is really understanding the importance of yourself and understanding your values, your successes, being aware of your strengths and your weaknesses. honesty. And when I think of honesty in the long run, integrity. It's knowing yourself through and through, being consistent, not trying to sound better than you are, exaggerate your strengths. There's a humility associated with honesty. There's a consistency and integrity associated with honesty. Humility in that they're not self-focused. They recognize their strengths and their weaknesses and also have perspective of their place in the world. And in this greater universe, we are one small person, and people who are self-aware have recognition of that, and that recognition comes with humility. So it's the ability to allow others to be celebrated, to have the spotlight, and to not always need to be the center of attention. And that is also confidence. People who are self-aware tend to be secure. That's not braggarts, but they again understand their strengths and their weaknesses. They don't try and cover up their mistakes and their flaws. And there's a great confidence in not having to just put the light on your strengths, but also be willing to show the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses, and owning those and accepting those fully makes them not feel so vulnerable to share with others. It becomes a gift, just like your strengths, to share with others. In questioning yourself about how self-aware are you, some questions to ask yourself are, can you name the emotions that you're feeling at all times? I usually use a feeling wheel, and you won't believe, and I'm sure you will believe, how often people cannot recognize a feeling, or they'll describe a thought rather than a feeling. Are you able to recognize why you react and behave the way you do? Can you name your triggers? Do you know your values? Can you accurately describe the impact you have on others? Do you know your strengths? What about your weaknesses or areas for growth? Can you name what you need to feel fulfilled in your relationships? Yes to those questions is a reflection of self-awareness, and no means it's probably an area for growth. If you recognize that you're being negative, yes. A quick tip for changing that is to change it into a what question. So what can I do to improve the situation? So whatever the negative thought is, ask yourself what you can do to defy that outcome, if that makes sense. So what can I do if maybe I'm worried that I'm going to get a negative self-evaluation, or maybe I'm even reacting to a negative evaluation from another, and I consider it. And I think, what can I do to improve based on this feedback? So there's that negative, I'm worried, and I'm maybe overthinking or ruminating, and I change that into more an action step. So anything that's a solution focused thought will help eliminate that negativity. And that's a really good question and a really important part, because again, that rumination, people confuse introspection and rumination. And sometimes people can be overly self-aware on the internal self-awareness, but not have the ability to shift it and turn it into more positive, and rather than a stuck type of thinking.
I just want to make a comment. This is Jeanette. That question has to resonate with everybody, because I think, especially during the past, we just, I think, crossed the 1 year mark where we were asked to work remotely because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think over time, it would be easy to look at more of the negatives, because there didn't seem to be an end in sight, and then there was a panic, and then you inject the social unrest and the political unrest. So I could very easily see how people could be negative about the situation and maybe where they are at certain points in their life throughout this entire pandemic. So that, when I saw that question pop up, I said, oh my gosh, like I can't imagine, anyone on this call not having a negative thought, especially throughout all of these restrictions and things that have remained so out of our control, So I guess my question for you, Dr. Lisa, is when it comes to things that really are out of our control, we're not choosing to deal with the pandemic. This is what's been thrown in our laps. How do we reverse or mitigate that? Right? How do we deal with that and put sort of a solution focused question, or how do we turn that into something that's positive?
So really, how do we handle the pieces that are out of our control, right? That there may be factors impacting us that are out of our control, and how do we identify ourselves as the solution to that? Am I understanding the question?
Correct.
And I think part of it is even just framing it like that to ourselves, that recognition of what is out of our control, first of all. And that's part of what we, if the serenity prayer is, the wisdom to know the difference in between what's in our control and what's out of our control when we're looking to make change. And so the pandemic was largely out of all of our control. And some of the things that we could do to control it early on, we talked about, were some of those self-care things, looking at what was in our control. We could mitigate how much risk we exposed ourselves. We could make decisions about what we could do to still connect with our loved ones in spite of the quarantine requirements. We could look at what we could do to stay fit in spite of not being able to go to the normal gym class. And so it's that taking what is that obstacle, that piece that's out of our control, and claiming back a piece of it for ourselves. Like, in spite of that, what can I do to still fulfill what's important to me? What am I valuing here? So maybe in the gym, I was valuing my health and fitness. And I might have also been valuing a social aspect with the friends. And so I have to look at that. Okay, so instead I'm going to go for runs early in the morning, and I'm going to call my friends and have a cup of coffee with them. And it feeds my values. I'm looking for solutions to meet those values with awareness of the obstacles that the environment is putting in my way that are out of my control. Did that answer it, Jeanette?
It did. It's interesting when you started this topic, I didn't think that it was going to be as challenging to really understand what self-awareness is. I mean, I kind of went into this thinking, I know all about self-awareness. I've learned all about it in the past couple years between the pandemic and being a breast cancer survivor. Like, I got this figured out. But there's a lot of questions that you touched on in the self-awareness questions slide that I had to stop and think about. So I really think that that's a great exercise, and sort of doing a check, on yourself, and just kind of really evaluating from more of an objective opinion if you can. It's very hard to be objective about yourself, obviously, but I think just taking the time to go through this exercise is really reflective and can really help a lot of people understand truly, where they are on that self-awareness spectrum.
And in fact, if everyone will get out a paper and pen or pencil, I do have a self-awareness exercise to do at the end that is some specific questions that will help give you some insight into awareness. And as you're getting that, I'm going to cover a couple more slides, and then we'll get to that exercise. But thank you for that, Jeanette. And there are some more specific questions I'm going to go over, and hopefully they'll spark some thoughts in you too. So self-awareness research is pretty limited, and it's a hard concept to define and measure. It exists within a social context also. So we aren't an isolated bubble. Some people we know lack the ability to be self-aware. People with autism lack some self-awareness. People with traumatic brain injuries lack self-awareness. And so it can create uncomfortable and awkward social interactions at times too. Overly self-aware can be correlated with that rumination that I talked about that can breed anxiety and self-consciousness. So we want to be careful to be engaged in reflection, which is growth-oriented, solution-oriented, versus rumination, which is negative-oriented and worry-based. And self-awareness is a balance. So some strategies for increasing self-awareness include meditation, asking for feedback from your friends, from your coworkers, from people you trust, questioning your assumptions, identifying your mental habits that prevent you from self-growth. Journaling is a great way to do that. Practice active listening. Spend time thinking about your values, prioritize them. Evaluate your strengths and weaknesses. Observe your stream of consciousness. Change up your routine. Travel somewhere new or seek a new experience. Draw out your life timeline. Write out your future eulogy. Pay attention to what bothers you about other people. And likely if you spot it, you got it. Write down your goals, plans, and priorities. Be physically active. Take healthy risks. Join a therapy group. And now we're going to do that exercise. I just want to share these quotes with you before we start that. And these are all from Rumi. Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself. And Jeanette, I think that speaks to what you were saying. And all these things that are out of control, what do we do? And that wisdom is recognizing and accepting what you're in control of and what you can change. The quieter you become, the more able you are to hear. As we settle down and be quiet in ourselves, what we need to understand comes up. The desire to know your own soul will end all other desires. And finally, your task is not to seek love, but to merely seek to find all the barriers within you yourself that you have built against it. And I'm going to read these little sentence starters, and I'd like you to jot down on your paper your answers to them. It all starts with, I am someone that. I am someone that loves. I am someone that wants to. I am someone that has a goal of. I am someone that used to be afraid of. I am someone that notices. I am someone that wishes I could. I am someone that is happiest when. I am someone that gets disappointed by. I am someone that believes in. I am someone that will one day. I am someone that is inspired by. I am someone that has a habit of. I am someone that would give. And last, I am someone that hopes. I hope this exercise allowed you the opportunity to self-reflect. Maybe some of your answers will surprise you. Maybe some of your answers were hard to come by. Maybe they need a little bit more reflection in one area or another. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I have a question. As you move through this process of sort of, discovering your self-awareness, I'm guessing that you don't get to one spot and then stay there, just because of the nature of human beings and, the dynamics of the environment around us in the world and all the people we interact with. doesn't it shift around a little bit? So your self-awareness it's like ebbs and flows. Once you get to that heightened sense, you may be there for, 6 months, and then it may shift into a different box. I mean, should your goal be to always be in one quadrant and in that, those boxes that you were, the 4 self-awareness archetypes, like obviously high external, high internal is where we want to be, right? But I don't know that I've always been there. Like, I feel like I am now, but sometimes I'm in those other areas. So is it safe to say that you shift throughout your life?
It is, and it's a continual process. So in order to remain self-aware, we have to continue the reflective process, as both we and the environment we exist in are dynamic, and it's an ongoing change process. And as we make change in ourselves, it's the environment that we get feedback from that reinforces or consequences those changes, so we get that feedback loop. So it is a continual process, and even when we think we are aware, we still have blind spots. We all have blind spots, and sometimes we don't even know what our blind spots are because we don't have the experience to expose us to those yet. And as we gain new experiences and we continue that quest for learning, that's why traveling to new places and having new experiences is part of a self-awareness and reflective process, because it allows us an opportunity to see things in ourselves that we had never considered before. So I think, yes, Jeanette, it is an ongoing life process. And even when we are and believe ourselves to be self-aware, there are always blind spots and areas for growth in ways that we haven't seen yet or identified yet.
Yeah, I can't stop staring at that 4 self-awareness archetype slide. I'm going to have to go through this again later on. I want to read one of the comments from our employees. She says, "This has been a wonderful seminar. As always, thank you. Many thanks to you, Jeanette. Many thanks for always making these seminars available. Your efforts are always appreciated. Thank you, Dr. Seppenauer, for your expertise as well." Yeah, it is an incredible process, and I think it's probably one that evolves in many different directions throughout your lifetime based on your personal experiences. And I will tell you, we've had this discussion openly before. I'm very transparent with everybody about my life's experiences because I think it helps me become a better person in doing that. And I found that throughout my therapeutic process and after being a breast cancer survivor, I really am, my perspective on so many different things has changed. And I've become, less afraid of the things that used to terrify me. And I'm not suggesting that you have to have a brush with death to have that experience, but it certainly does make you put you in a position very quickly to reevaluate, what's truly important in your life. And as you were going through that list at the end, the one that resonated with me was, I used to be afraid of, I used to be afraid of everything. I used to be afraid of being alone. I used to be afraid of traveling alone. I used to be afraid of not being in a relationship. And, now I'm all of those things and I couldn't be happier. So I really think that you do have to do the work and put the time in. It's just like exercise, except it's for the brain. You can't go into the gym for 2 days and come out and get ready for a competition, right? You have to go continuously over time. So this is like, training for your brain, for your mental health and well-being. And I have to tell you, I'm not quite where I want to be yet, but I think I've made tremendous progress. And sometimes seeing things laid out like this really helps. And these small exercises, really, it's amazing how it forces you to just kind of, you have like an aha moment, and I think if that's what people get out of this, then mission accomplished,
Awesome. Awesome. And someone asked if they could have a copy of the questions. They are in the slide deck. If
Yes.
Jeanette has access.
Yeah,
So-
I have the deck, and I'll anybody that's on the call that would like a copy of this, please email me and I'll send them over. I've also posted it on the wellness intranet page. This was really insightful and really interesting, and I think I would encourage all of us to revisit some of those questions. You know, I am someone that. Like, that's really interesting to look at those and you know, answer them honestly with no one around, and just look at your responses and see how you feel about that, you know. So it's
turn it into a family exercise too, and share it with your family members and have everyone. I mean, it's a great communication exercise to do with people that you care about.
Yeah, there's actually a really good comment in here. Barbara says, we don't go to the gym to find muscles, we go to strengthen the ones we have. That's brilliant,
Yes.
right? I mean, that is such an incredible observation. And it's so true. And I think the same applies to mental health, and that we really have to take the time to, you know, to reflect. You know, it's incredibly important. So I really appreciate how, I don't know, how deep a dive we do in such a short period of time. I think it really makes a big difference that, you know, that we take a few minutes out of the day to give ourselves this opportunity to take the tools and resources and do a little self-reflecting. You know, I mean, it's been a very challenging year, and one where there still is no clear end in sight. So I think the things that we can control that are within our power, we should do our best to do that. And hopefully we are providing everybody with the resources and tools that they need to do that. And, you know, Dr. Lisa, your input and expertise is always very much appreciated. So thank you again for taking the time, you know, to share this with us. And we will look forward to having you back again for the next discussion. And if anyone has any, you know, questions or comments about how they can reach Dr. Lisa, please email me and I'll make the connection for you, and also get you a copy of the slide deck. Yeah, great discussion today again, and thank you so much. And thanks everyone for taking, you know, some of their lunch hour to spend with us on this very important topic.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Dr. Lisa. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day, everybody.